Thanks, Peter, and thanks everybody who's come out on this glistening evening to talk about the ABC. We're all suffering on the east coast of Australia the remnant effect of Cyclone Debbie, which has devastated Queensland, and now there's a big rain depression coming all the way down to New South Wales. I acknowledge too that we meet on Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. So the breaking news for the ABC debate and discussion is that the Turnbull government has just appointed one Justin Milne as the new chairman of the ABC to replace Jim Spiegelman. Jim wanted an extension, I think, for another 5-year term, but that wasn't to be. The Prime Minister and the Minister for Communications, Mitch Fifield, determined that they needed a change of chairmanship, and Justin Milne has got the job. He had to apply because under the ABC Act, board appointments are covered by a merit selection process, both for the ABC and SBS. This is something that those who support public broadcasting and wanted the board governance to be depoliticised have insisted on, and we campaigned for a long time to get that merit selection, because as you know, the ABC board has been politicised by stacking, patronage and stacking by whether it's the Labor Party or the Liberal Party in power. And this was debilitating for those of us who worked inside the organisation, because there was a second guessing by ABC management of what the minister and the government of the day was. So it was followed the UK Nolan rules. One of the good things Tony Blair did was to try to say all government boards should have a merit assessment. You look at the governance arrangements, and you try to get a mix of people with experiences on government agencies and boards that would really bring something of value, not seat warmers and party political hacks who've been rewarded for their political efforts, but somebody who's going to take the institution a hell of a long way forward. But to his credit, Justin Milne put his hand up. He was invited to apply, and he was up against a whole range of people. We'll never find out who the shortlist is. He's a former associate of Malcolm Turnbull's. Let that be on the public record. Back from their time in Aussie Mail, he's been a content creator. He's made documentaries, so he knows about. I'm looking at all the positives. Yeah. He knows about content creation, which is important to us, particularly in the world now of video streaming, Netflix and Stan, and overseas video streamers who get access to all the eyeballs of Australia now through video streaming, through Wi-Fi, connected to your smart television. That's changing the nature of access to audiences, not just free-to-air digital, analog and now digital transmission. It's everybody can get access to your eyeballs and your attention through Wi-Fi video streaming. It's quite an astounding game changer in media, in broadcast media. So he knows all about that. He knows about content, and he certainly knows about audience. And we're hoping, we're going to cut him some slack. We're hoping that Justin Milne is a very great positive, because under the ABC Act, his responsibility is to secure the future, the sustainable future of the ABC. He comes in the context of the last time I addressed politics in the pub was 2014, when the incoming and the Abbott hockey budget 2014 had cut the budget of the ABC. In spite of Tony Abbott's infamous statement on the eve of the 2013 election that, remember, there'll be no cuts to the ABC and SBS. And of course there were cuts, and Tony had lied. And it was very Jesuitical of Tony to put that. He's a tactician and a warrior, as we all know, but he made a straight out commitment to the Australian public on the eve of the and the 2013 election to try to get people across the line against the then returned Kevin Rudd. You remember the politics of that. We never let Tony Abbott forget that lie, and we never shall. You never forget. We can always forgive at some future time if there's a little bit of intellectual honesty. So here we are in 2017, and Justin Milne is replacing Jim Spiegelman. So let that stand. The other disturbing aspect is that the Minister and Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister, have also avoided sidestepped the merit selection process to appoint Vanessa Guthrie, former head of the Minerals Council of Australia, in Western Australia based, to the board of the ABC. She didn't go through the merit selection process. Vanessa Guthrie, no relation to Michelle Guthrie, the current managing director of the ABC. And I've said, let it be noted that sidestepped the merit selection process. The selection committee had other names at the top of the list, but Mitch Fifield and Malcolm Turnbull went around that and gave the gig to Vanessa Guthrie. At a time of very great contention about climate change, the power of coal to the Australian economy, which I've certainly acknowledged, post-war coal has helped Australia build up its first world economy, exports to Japan, and the strength of our cheap coal-fired power. That's been acknowledged, but now we find ourselves embroiled in a great debate about the sustainability of energy and its economics, particularly after the difficulties over South Australia. All those things are playing out. So everybody will be watching Vanessa Guthrie's influence on the ABC over time. She can't change the ABC editorial policies without all the board agreeing to it, and the ABC editorial policies make the journalists who work there apply editorial judgments to the accepted standards of objective journalism. And you can have a debate about that, but whether you work in an outfit outside the ABC, the same thing, the same principles apply, that you have to honestly look at all issues and make an editorial judgment of what's to be highlighted based on a proper news value, a judgment and assessment of all those facts. So Michelle Guthrie a couple of weeks ago had announced that there'll be, she's been in the job less than 12 months, and for the first time she's come forward with her structure. Remember, Mark Scott, the previous managing director, had to deal with the defunding. That process is ongoing. There's been no, the ScoMo, Scott Morrison and Malcolm Turnbull haven't either wanted to or been able to cut the ABC any financial slack. So poor Michelle Guthrie has come aboard, appointed by the Spiegelman board as managing director, as the ABC's operational base funding is in decline, and it will be in decline for the foreseeable future, which makes all of us who support public broadcasting have to stand up and say we want adequate funding for the ABC. So she has determined, ladies and gentlemen, that with the board, the support of the Spiegelman board, that she is going to raid. There's going to be a brutal restructure, brutal in the sense that she is creating what she calls a content fund, immediately worth about $20 million a year, but building up to $50 million. That'll be extracted from brutal payroll reductions. And she says those brutal payroll, she doesn't use the word brutal, I'm using the word brutal because people being thrown out of work, whether you're in management or in creative content, that's brutal. Yeah. When you're being thrown out of work, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, that's brutal in the human consequences for those people. But she says she's flattening the management of the ABC, building in accountabilities that the staff have always complained of, that there's been no accountability, no effective accountability in ABC management, and I always thought there was some truth in that, to create a content fund and that is, and I want to quote from her address to staff recently, to say that the content is what's going to make the ABC survive into the future. So that she made this presentation to staff on the 7th of March, in which she announced a 20% cut in management positions, with 150 to 200 to leave the ABC by the 30th of June, and compounding 14 divisions into 8. She said, incremental reform isn't the answer. Transformational change over the next year is essential. And I'm quoting directly so you can understand, in fairness to her, what her strategy is, so we can all understand it. We lack the flexibility, she says, to quickly adjust to the fast-changing audience trends. Our reach on television and radio is declining, and digital is struggling to bridge the divide. We have significant audience gaps socially, culturally, and geographically. This means we're falling short of properly and effectively representing in our employees, content and audience impact the modern Australia in which we live. Now, Michelle Guthrie said the $50 million a year content fund would be contestable, with the program commissioning criteria to be posted externally. Competition would be fierce. This is the biggest sum the ABC has ever committed to such a venture. It's warranted and timely, she said. Still quoting, I'd love a creative solution that gives us a strong lead into the all-important 7 p.m. ABC News program. We need to expand digital storytelling in news and take a fresh look at bolstering key genres like the arts, science, fitness and sport. So that's motherhood to me as a content creation. If you're not in the content game, you're not doing anything. The new structure is to be platform neutral. Remember, all the digital revolution's changed the way young people in particular access any content. They're doing it on their mobile phones and their iPads, mostly mobile phones. She said there's going to be platform neutral to address consistent staff complaints about unaccountable management. The new divisions are news, TV, radio, regional, audiences, technology, finance and engagement. ABC International, you remember, gutted 2 years ago by the ABC's loss of its $20 million a year separate DFAT contract and the shutdown of much of Radio Australia, which is vandalism to our national interest. That will now disappear to be rolled into the new division, as would ABC Commercial. You remember, after the Abbott hockey cuts, the ABC closed down almost all its ABC shops and centres in the retail outlets of Australia. In the digital shopping mall, the online shopping is removing the need or the profitability of these retail outlets. Targeted redundancies are now all in play at the ABC for the poor people. It's not a general call for redundancies. People come up and point to you and say, I want you gone, here's your white envelope, and we'll negotiate your way out the door. The question for all of us is, and some executive producers are complaining now, that some of these cuts also affect production staff. They're not just management, they're production staff, which are required to produce the huge output of the ABC every day. And if this impacts on programs, I think it'll have a political backlash against Michelle Guthrie and the board. So, $50 million content fund is to be the ABC board's survival strategy. New content takes time to develop and get to air. The ABC's drama budget, as you know, is already severely constrained. The ABC's primetime TV schedule is dependent on BBC shows like QI, Broadchurch, Vera or Midsummer Murders. Now, like me, I like a lot of these programs. QI, I like it. I don't know what you think about QI, but we can all argue about what programs we like. But the ABC's had to rely on these off-the-shelf programs, some years old, to maintain the viability of its primetime schedule, people wanting to switch on. Now, one exasperated viewer has queried whether there is any village left in merry England not devastated each week by a gruesome murder. So for me, watching ABC's output, where's the Australian content? There is Australian content there, and they are promoting it, but it'll be only through certain stages of the year, and it'll be part of the co-production. We'll get 1 or 2 shows on the ABC, then it'll go off to Foxtel where they can make their money back. They don't make any money off the ABC showing, from advertising and what have you. We get the money from the taxpayer and from what's called a producer's offset, and other investors like lottery funds and what have you to make the content. So the ABC very constrained content in entertainment, the things that you and I like to watch. It's other important work, like it's doing in Queensland now with emergency services reporting on radio and online. It takes a lot of effort to keep that pumping out 24/7. So the new chairman will inherit, Justin Mill will inherit, what influence he'll have I don't know, but he'll inherit Jim Spiegelman's survival strategy, its new flattened management, the Jim Spiegelman appointed managing director, Michelle Guthrie, and declining funding. The operational based funding is not improving, operational costs go up, and the only way you can create any money to do anything, to build anything, is on the payroll. About 70% of the appropriation, the taxpayer appropriation, goes on payroll for staff. So that's the only thing that gives. So it's the board's role. Michelle Guthrie said famously that it wasn't her role to advocate for funding, and everybody raised their eyebrows. So, well, if it's not your job to advocate for funding, whose is it? It's the board's role. And Justin Milne has indicated at this early stage that he's not going to go there. So if he doesn't go there, I'm hoping he will, of course. He'll understand as he grapples with what the ABC is required to do under the Act, what the audience perspective is, the high level of trust that still exists within the ABC. It's up there with the, and higher in fact than the High Court of Australia in trust. Charities, good Australian charities are up the high. The wine industry is still pretty high in trust, corporate trust. Down the bottom, as you'll know, banks are pretty low on trust. But the ABC, ladies and gentlemen, is high and has maintained a consistently high trust with the Australian people. And we've argued very strongly, do not do anything to ruin your reputation and the trust that the public has. Holding trust when you haven't got any programs, the mix of programs necessary to hold your audience is an important strategy, and I'm hoping Justin Milne will come to that realisation, and then whatever his friendship with Malcolm is, say, hey Malcolm, he's got a responsibility statutorily as a board and the chairman of the board to say we cannot meet our obligations to the Australian public with this level of resources. Now I know it's very difficult. We're in a deficit distress, the deficit's gone up higher, still huge issues about company tax and negative gearing and the property bubble and all those things. But we're not asking for a lot of money to keep the ABC viable and building. Against Netflix and Stan and every other over-the-top video streamer who's got access to the same eyeballs that the ABC has, ABC audiences aren't necessarily loyal. You'll go to wherever you can be entertained and engaged. We've got a strong level of loyalty, but over time that can wither away. It can wither away if the ABC doesn't do all it can to hold on to the trust by the application of its journalism. It's frank and fearless, and it's fearless journalism, it's exposure journalism. You can easily lose that trust. So I'm hoping Justin Milne comes to that determination because he's an intelligent man. So he'll have to calculate how effective the ABC can be in sustaining audiences in the face of digital disruption and video streaming competitors without greatly lifting the ABC's content creation capacity. We go up to the May budget, Scott Morrison's next budget, and the ABC won't get a mention in that. There'll be no one coming to the rescue. SBS is in a world of hurt with its funding. It's gone full commercial road to the point of prostitution with various mechanisms it's got to give advertorial channels on and get an audience from and a revenue in multi-channeling. which is rather a departure from what Malcolm Fraser hoped would be the real remit of SBS, and that was to engage now our growing multicultural population and make those newcomers to Australia feel included by hearing programming in the languages from their country of origin. Absolutely vital to national cohesion. I'm desperately worried about SBS because in a world of jihadi recruitment, geopolitical terror, if ever there was a justification for a taxpayer investment in a multicultural outfit like SBS, this is it. If you want cohesion, you've got to be able to make people feel welcome in the country that they've come to. And for them to hear programs from the countries of origin is absolutely vital in the languages of their, and while we go through the intergenerational assimilation, which comes, as we all know, from Italian and Greek migration from post-war era. You really need SBS. Malcolm Fraser's legacy is still viable. ABC's okay up to a point, but a special broadcaster like SBS is important. So always try to keep SBS in mind as far as the public broadcasting outfit here. In the United States, the PBS sector is made to go with begging for money in pledge plea telethons.
Yeah.
Remember those of you who go to the United States and look at some PBS in the US does some wonderful programming, respects its audience, writes up to its audience, engages its audience, but it is niche. ABC Australia has a consistent audience. It has had of about 16% in television and 22-23%, fluctuates year on year, about 22-23% in radio across the platforms. It's going very well in online. The News Limited is News Corps has got the top online site that's everywhere in every community. Fairfax is second and the ABC is third. And then Yahoo, 9MSN, Guardian, various other outfits are further down the track. So the ABC is mainstream. And my point is, you've got to keep the public broadcaster mainstream with a major audience capacity to have the cohesive influence that's needed in its journalism. Otherwise, you surrender the country to Rupert Murdoch. Rupert, as I've said before, is a disgrace to journalism because he's been exposed, his culture has been exposed through the inquiries in the United Kingdom about emerging from phone hacking. The only thing I want to recommend to you, if you read Nick Davies' excellent book, Hack Attack, a reporter from The Guardian, they were the ones who exposed all the compromise of the London Metropolitan Police through News Corporation and the News of the World. It's a wonderful read and a great tribute to Nick and the Russ Bridger from the Guardian to do a piece of journalism on News Limited and to expose exactly what went on in the unethical culture of News Corporation. Don't get me wrong, I've got a lot of friends at News Corporation, and it's a big employer of journalists, and you would just have to maintain your capacity to say, I like that journalism, but I don't like these distortions, and you have to call it out. So I've been doing all I can to call out News Corporation while acknowledging that there are some very good journalists who work there. This is a difficulty for ABC public broadcasting supporters. The next federal election's not until 2019. The Friends of the ABC, wonderful people in branches around the country, are still in existence, now headed up by Margaret Reynolds, former Senator from Queensland. She's now in Tasmania, the partner of the great historian Henry Reynolds. Margaret, at this time of her life, has bravely stepped forward to head up the Friends of the ABC, trying to get a lot of younger supporters, younger people who are accessing ABC content, not just Triple J on devices. That's an important thing. Usually it's just old-timers who know all about the benefits of public broadcasting, trying to reach out to young people to say, hey, this is important that public broadcasting prevail. So there's a campaign on. There will be a campaign, and that is to secure the future of the ABC, hoping that Justin Milne and his board come on board and say, we can do so much, but unless there's some rescue in the finances of the outfit, we'll still have to keep cutting the ABC. Anybody who sees the West Wing and Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad and other long-form television, which now dominates video streaming, very engaging material, will know that that's a real threat. Michelle Guthrie's proposing extraordinary new content. Exactly what that will be out of 50 million. If true, if she does get to 50 million, I don't know. It's very hard to design new content that will be engaging and a winner. You have to take risks over time, and you need a critical mass of production staff. I've been saying to Mark Scott before, well before this, that the ABC was cut back. We haven't been doing drama inside the ABC for many, many years, not since GP in the 1980s. If we can't do drama again because it's too expensive, can we do documentary? We haven't been producing documentaries inside the ABC for years. We haven't got a natural history unit. A lot of the studio production staff they've gone, and it's all outsourced. So we've got a really big problem about maintaining distinctive content in a very competitive market. Not only the free-to-air commercial broadcasters, we want them to survive because they're Australian content. Home and Away, all these other commercial TV programs funded by advertisers, I give them full credit, they're staying in the game. Remember too, that we wouldn't have an Australian content industry in television unless there had been a legislated quota, a content quota on Australian television. Not only do they have to pay a licence fee, 7, 9 and 10, but they have to produce Australian content. You think Kerry Packer, when he was alive, would have given us stuff about Australian content unless he had a legislated content quota to go with his Channel 9 licence, which had enriched him beyond the wildest dreams of avarice and influence. So he wouldn't have done that. So we got an Australian content because there's a bit of legislation that requires us. Otherwise, we would have been swamped by Hollywood. We were swamped by Hollywood already. Hollywood produces some good stuff. It also produces some not so good stuff. So the national identity, which is part of the ABC's requirement under the ABC Act, is a big factor in what Michelle Guthrie is talking about. The only other thing to remind ourselves is that the ABC is not immune from its failings and faults. I've always said the ABC is a flawed institution, staffed by human beings, and they make the ABC, like anybody else, makes its fair share of mistakes and misjudgments. But I'm hoping that such is the strength of the editorial culture inside, and the real great enthusiasm for anybody who works there and seriously looks at the goodwill which is extended to the staff who get these creative opportunities in the ABC to return that. Most ABC people I've met are very enthusiastic about knowing how bloody important it is for the ABC to survive. In other countries it's been destroyed. Canada, they take advertising. In New Zealand, they take advertising on television. We've been able to, all through these post-war years, been able to stave off any commercialising of the ABC. Fortunately, we've had Rupert, Kerry Packer and Kerry Stokes, now at Channel 7, certainly agreeing with ABC public broadcasters that they don't want the ABC to take advertising. So before too long, I'm hoping Justin Milne will say, no, advertising is not the way to go. We've got some very strong allies in that point in the marketplace of Australia. So that's an important point. The other aspect would be whether Michelle Guthrie was going to maybe start charging a user pays fee for iView. iView is a major success in digital transmission and video streaming. You can go in and click on the program you missed and watch it at any time. There's a range of windows where you can access that. Millions of people use iView. It costs about $25 million a year for the server equipment to keep it up there. That cost is coming down as more people get onto iView from other broadcasters. And it could be that Michelle Guthrie and Justin Milne say, well, let's start putting a user pays on it. You've got to register, put in a PIN number, and we'll get some money off you. But last I heard, Michelle Guthrie thought it was too much of a logistical difficulty to start putting a user pays charge on iView. And if that prevails, that'll be good. Free to air, free to the taxpayers. You've all been paying your taxes, and that's what you get out of your taxes, apart from a defence portion, a social security system, and everything else our taxes go to. The ABC is that important point in it. The ABC has to earn its place, never take the audience for granted, and always maintain that level of trust. So Peter, I think I'll leave it there, and you can happy to answer any questions that you might have. We're still waiting for a bit of news on the contestable model that Michelle Guthrie has in mind. So there's a bit more information to come out in the current round. But those of us thinking about the survival of the ABC to its 100th birthday in 2032, here we are in 2017, longer term, need to rally in its support and its criticism, and to kick it in the shins when you don't think it's doing the right thing. The audience engagement is very important to the broadcaster and to the management and the board which runs it. Fortunately, we've got the ABC Act. Even though Peter Costello, I think, wanted to sell the ABC to Jamie Packer, it doesn't make any money, so it hasn't got a cash flow worth privatising. So even with the ABC shops, it didn't have a cash flow worth privatising. Joe Hockey said that we can't sell the ABC Quentin, we haven't got a cash flow. And privatisers look at a cash flow that they can get their hands on. So in many ways that'll secure the ABC survival under the ABC Act, but it can also be strangled by defunding over the years. So you're all, in this room, you're all political realists, you know how the world works. You have to maintain a strong public support for the public broadcaster and let the politicians know you touched that and we'll be coming for you. Thank you.